Today is day 14,841.
These little day videos I've been making have been helpful for me to get back in the routine of making videos. But some videos are so big that I want to make, and also these day videos are lacking in the conspiracy theory, or at least knowledge dropping. Not necessarily conspiracy theory, but just dropping knowledge. This is a knowledge drop channel. So the video that I want to make, and I may make it, I may not, maybe I'll just drop it here because it's too big to do. It's about the Great Panic of 1837. The Great Panic of 1837. So what that is was when Martin Van Buren took over for Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson served 2 terms, but to tell the story, we have to go back so many times. So we'll just start. I'm going to briefly do it. I will make a video on this, but this is an important concept that needs to be known. Not just the Great Panic of 1837, but everything that I'm going to tell you here. So there will be some videos about it. I'm just going to give you the skeletons. Let me just start. So it starts with the Colonial Scrip. This is before the constitutional republic we have, but the currency or the money before the continental was called the scrip, Colonial Scrip, and it was backed by land. And supposedly everybody was living happily ever after in the colonies. Everybody was happy, everybody was prosperous, all for one, one for all. And Benjamin Franklin was in England, and he was taking a look around. He said, wow, there's so much poverty and prostitution here. This is the richest land in the world. Why are there people unemployed? And they believed in Malthusianism, which goes to that the Thanos video I made. All those people excited about Thanos. Thanos was not wrong and all that. And it's where they believe that there should be war or famine to wipe out part of the population in order to reduce the surplus of labor, which is also talked about in 1984 by George Orwell. And the Malthusianism is a big part of history that I never learned about till I got to college, and I was actually in a special program in college where I learned about it in a negative manner. And I don't even know if the regular college students were taught about Malthusianism. And I think it's a huge topic because Malthusianism is part of Darwinism. Darwinism is part of evolution. Evolution is there, so they made the fake dinosaurs. The dinosaurs are there so that they could create a 100 million plus history of Earth, which then gives them the ability to create a 14 billion year universe, which is there to back their whole Darwinism. The reason why they need Darwinism is because once Martin Luther created Lutheranism and the Reformation of the church, the church used to kill in the name of. Once you could no longer kill in the name of, how do you perform mass extinctions, mass murder? Because in this Malthusianism mindset, they had to kill. They literally had to kill people, and this concept of Malthusianism perpetuates to this day. Where you have all these fanatics in favor of Thanos snapping his finger, killing off half the planet's population. This is inappropriate thinking. It's scarcity thinking, especially in the 21st century. So Malthus, you need to know the history of Malthus. Look it up yourself, but as you read about it, realize, who are you reading? Are you reading the history of Malthus based on a Darwinian scholar or an anti-Malthusian, anti-mass murder, anti-mass poverty, all these things? So, where am I? So Franklin was witnessing this Malthusianism and asked why. And they said, well, why is your grass so greener in the colonies? And he said, well, it's very easy. We have the Colonial Scrip. Everybody's prosperous. And he explained how it worked. The people that found out that there was prosperity happening in the colonies were like, we gotta put an end to that. How dare those colonists enjoy life? So they did away with the Colonial Scrip. And I'm assuming, I didn't read far enough in, but I'm guessing that's where the Continental came out. I guess that was coined by whatever the future Congress would be. And the Continental, as you know, was inflationary quasi-fiat currency in opposition to the Colonial Scrip, which I guess was for and by the people. This is the beginnings of the central banking tyranny of the United States, which is the supposed alternate version of why we had the American Revolution. So it said that it wasn't against tea. See, okay, our history has been rewritten by the deep state to cover up all that they did. So the story we're taught was the Boston Tea Party, where they dumped all the tea in the ocean or in the harbor. And, it's a terrorist act and yada, yada. But apparently what it really was about was protesting another country controlling our currency. They wanted their own colonial scrip. They didn't get it. And you have to wonder, how did we beat the British? And then you wonder, well, did we? Because we didn't get to keep the colonial scrip. And in the Constitution, it labels that only Congress shall coin money. And even that's not followed because it's the Federal Reserve that, I guess, creates the money. But there's a whole thing behind that. So everyone's living happily ever after in the colonies. British find out, they put a stop to it. And then you have the Revolutionary War. After the war, you then have the Constitution. 1789, George Washington becomes president. And the founders, like Jefferson, so then you have the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists. And that's a part of history that isn't really taught well enough. And it needs to be taught more. I'm not going to fully teach it here, but you need to know the dual legacy. So my company is called Dual Legacy. It's a concept I learned in college that there's these opposing views all throughout Western civilization. And so you have the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists, and they're the ones that were making the decisions on how we were going to govern ourselves. One is a centralized form of government, and the other is decentralized. And then you have the debates between Jefferson and Hamilton. Jefferson wanted an agrarian society, and Hamilton wanted an industrial business society. But to do that, you invite lenders, and when you invite lenders, then they get to control your fate. You don't. Whereas the agrarian society, think about it, you're self-sufficient, you're living off your own production. And so those are the two views. Now, would I want to be living on a farm in 2019 right now? No, I'm happy with some of the things that Hamilton got, but the price you have to pay for that is some of your freedom. And so that difference between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, and then it goes throughout history. So Alexander Hamilton, who has been celebrated as of late, primarily by the Democrats, which is funny because I don't think they always liked him, the deep state, he got the first charter for the Bank of, I guess, England in the USA in the year 1791. Now, the way they tell it is, well, there was a Revolutionary War and there was a lot of people that wanted to get paid back for their services. So you got to pay people, and they all got paid off with inflationary continentals, which became worthless. So that's part of the reasoning behind it. And Jefferson's against the bank, and a lot of people. It wasn't just Jefferson. It was like dual factions. They don't want the bank. They get it. 1791, you get the first bank. It's a 20-year charter. So what's 20 years from 1791? 1811. So they do not renew the charter in 1811. It's a big deal here. This is like a huge deal. This is a huge missing part of history. It doesn't get renewed. So then what do you have in 1812? The War of 1812. What was the War of 1812 about? You probably don't remember. You probably were never even given a clear example. To this day, I can't get a clear example. But we're told the USA won and beat England and Canada and elsewhere. But the outcome of the War of 1812 was the bank got another 20-year charter. So, what's 20 years from 1812? 1832. Who becomes president? Andrew Jackson. What does Andrew Jackson do? He orders the withdrawal of all money from federal banks and deposit it into national banks. Now, national banks mean state banks. The way our country is now is not the way it was during Andrew Jackson's time. States had a lot more control back then. The Civil War kind of changed all that. It granted more centralization, but whatever, that's another story. Andrew Jackson takes all that out. This pisses off Hydra and the deep state. So they throw everything at him. They don't win. And Andrew Jackson's re-election campaign, his slogan was, you either vote for Andrew Jackson and no bank, or the bank and no Andrew Jackson. The people elected Jackson. And Jackson was the last president to pay off the national debt. Now, how the heck is that not like a bigger trivia item? Because they don't want you to think about that. They want you to think in the mindset of debt is money and debt is good. Jackson wasn't for the debt. He paid out the debt. This pissed off the deep state. They couldn't stop Andrew Jackson. He was like invincible. But, and this is what I'm getting at. So now that you got all that history, sorry it took that long to get here. Sorry if I'm not enthusiastically talking about it, but this is important. So I thought, well, what happened to Andrew Jackson? They couldn't have possibly just let Andrew Jackson win and that's it. They just waited him out. And this is the key, because Trump will be reelected. Oh man, it's going to start raining. So I'm going to start walking and talking. But whoever comes after Trump, they're going to do what they did to Andrew Jackson's successor. Who was Andrew Jackson's successor? Martin Van Buren. What happened to Martin Van Buren? The deep state threw the kitchen sink at him and created the Great Panic of 1837. Now, that's basically was one of the first recessions, and it has to do with, they called it gold and silver, they called it specie back then. And they basically rigged the game. There's so many different angles to this whole thing, the way it's explained depending on who you read. But essentially, a staged crisis was put in place with some manipulation and orchestration of markets and whatnot. And if you listen to the deep states version, they'll tell you it had to do with cotton prices and farming, a bunch of other things, gold, land. There's all different answers for it. But the concept, the main concept, is that was one of the first orchestrations of an attack on the economy, economic warfare. And Martin Van Buren was not reelected, and people basically kind of surrendered. The deep state brought the people to their knees because they were able to create mass unemployment and force people into pain. When people have the pain, they basically just surrender and give in. So all the good that Andrew Jackson did was wiped out, and then eventually leads to the Civil War. That's 1861 to 1865, and that's where you get the central form of government in the aftermath. And then you have it's called the great crime of 1871, or is it 1873? The crime of 1873. That's where they demonetized silver. And actually before that, if you look up February 21st, 1871, that's the day the United States became a corporation. So all this, and then obviously in 1913 you get the Federal Reserve. But the key, I guess what I want you to take home here, and I'm going to make some, I'm doing this off the top of my head outside right now. So like if I said anything incorrectly, come on, cut me a break here. I'm not a PhD expert in American history, but these are the stories I've read over time. And, when you first come in contact with the info, you don't fully understand it. I still don't fully understand it. But there's an alternate history. And what I've gathered from reading The Unseen Hand by Ralph Epperson, this book is phenomenal. You got to read it. And the subtitle is An Introduction to the Conspiratorial View of History. And it says that the real American history is the people against central banking. Oh, this is where I wanted to lead this to. Trump, who's a registered Republican, he's listed as a Republican. In the Oval Office, he has a portrait of Andrew Jackson in the Oval Office. Now, Andrew Jackson is he's a Democrat. In fact, the Democrat Party up until recently, their special dinner every year was called the Jefferson Jackson Gala, or the Jefferson Jackson Dinner. They've thrown Jefferson and Jackson under the bus. I guess the deep state did that. They don't want the stories to come out. And then they're both labeled racist. How convenient. And so you got to ask yourself, why is a Republican president have a portrait of a Democrat president? Not just any Democrat, but like the named Andrew Jackson. Well, it could be that Trump has plans for his second term to pull an Andy Jackson. Remains to be seen, but it sure looks that way. Trump's also invincible, seemingly, like Andrew Jackson. My concern, this is why I'm talking about the panic of 1837, is whoever succeeds Trump won't have it's not even balls. I mean, I don't even know what you call it. The Teflon, the invincibility, the never say die. There's only one Trump. Even Donnie Jr. isn't Donnie Sr. Nobody's Trump. Trump is a phenom, and whoever comes after him, I don't think is going to be able to withstand, and I don't think the people will be able to withstand the hell to pay that the deep state is going to bring upon us once Trump is gone. So everybody needs to get educated on this, the Panic of 1837, learn all angles. You can learn the deep state version. There's plenty of that out there, but also learn the conspiratorial angle of an orchestration and payback for what Andrew Jackson did. And what he did was pay off the debt, and he took all the money out of the banks. Think about how, and three guys, it took like the third guy he hired to do it, because everyone didn't want to fight Hydra. That's another thing. Learn about Hydra, not S.H.I.E.L.D's enemy, but the original Hydra. There's a famous picture. It's a cartoon of Andrew Jackson battling Hydra, and once he cuts off one, another one sprouts up. So Trump's fighting the same people Andrew Jackson was fighting. That's Hydra. Learn about it. Learn about Andrew Jackson against the bank. And most of the info out there is by them, so you gotta read between the lines. But anyway, that's my story for today. What is this, day 14,831, 41, whatever it is. Great Panic of 1837. If you see another video on this, if there's another video on this, just use it as reinforcement. Because I'm just talking this off the top of my head. This helps me get it off my chest for now. I could rest and have a good time the rest of the night. This story is very important to me, and I think it's important for everybody else to know. The history of Andrew Jackson, the history of the Colonial Scrip, Benjamin Franklin, the real causes of the American Revolution, the central bank's power and hold and grip on the American society, knowing that before we had central banking, the Colonial Scrip provided prosperity for all in the colonies. Did we actually really defeat the British? And what would life be like without a central banking system? What would it be like to go back to gold and silver? What were the pros and cons to gold and silver? Because apparently gold and silver is not the answer for everything. You need to have some kind of paper money. But what should it be backed on? Oil, land, labor? Especially if we're moving into a post-labor world. And the biggest thing of it all is the hidden history. I think that's really, as a conspiracy theorist, it's not so much the actual events that happen that bother me, it's the cover-ups. And not just the cover-ups, but the blanketing, the prevention of understanding the topics. Just tell us what happened. Let us know who did what. And we'll fill in the blanks. Because like I said, there's pros and cons to Alexander Hamilton and pros and cons to Thomas Jefferson. Just like there's pros and cons to Keynesianism and the Austrian School of Economics. If you guys don't know about those two things, listen to the rap songs Fear the Boom and Bust and Fight of the Century Volume 2 by Econ Stories. Really good songs. Without these dual legacies, without these concepts in your mind, you won't understand American history and you won't understand where we're at and what the battles actually are about. Central authority versus decentralization. The deep state wants central power. QAnon wants it in the hands of the people. Go Trump. Where we go one, we go all. May the force be with you. Love you guys. Have a good one. I'll see you in the next one.